And now it's time for the first keynote of the day. Please welcome to the stage Shoptalk's Senior Vice President of Content, Krystina Gustafson, and Shoptalk's Vice President of Content, Joe Laszlo. They will be presenting Shoptalk original content on the retail Zeitgeist, 4 trends that are changing the game.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you all as well.
Yes, thank you all for joining us for the final day of keynotes at Shoptalk Europe. Joe and I are both huge game show fans, and for any of our fellow fanatics out there, you may have recognized that as a revamped version of the theme song to The Price is Right. It's one of my earliest memories of just how fun the game of retail can be. Now, to that point, over the past 2 days, you've heard from industry leaders across the full sweep of industry innovation about how the game of retail is changing. At any given moment in time, though, there are some trends that become so notable they come to define the spirit of the time. Or to stick with today's game show metaphor, the things that are most important for retailers who want to win with today's consumer.
Exactly. So for the next 20 minutes, we're going to discuss 4 areas that retailers and brands need to invest in and focus on in order to win. Think of it like a Jeopardy board. Again, we're leaning really hard into the game show theme this morning. Each transformational category has a variety of specific strategies and tactics underneath it. Usually, players kind of start at the top with the simplest or lowest investment approaches and then kind of work down to riskier, more challenging steps from there. It's a rare contestant who can run the entire board from left to right and from bottom to top. So usually, companies and contestants will pick their strategic areas of focus very carefully, kind of focusing on the things that they're good at, working their way down, and kind of moving from there. Please note, although there is a Jeopardy thing going on, we are not going to be phrasing this presentation in the form of questions. The categories, the categories on our board today are the supply chain, payments, new platforms, with a special dive into one that we're all very focused on these days, and the changing consumer, and in particular, consumers' time and attention.
Right, so the first category we're going to talk about on our board today is the supply chain. And bear with me because I'm going to pivot very briefly from one type of game to another, because in my mind, I like to equate the supply chain to goalkeepers. Well, the supply chain, or in this specific scenario, the goalkeeper, doesn't typically generate the same attention as a star forward like a Cristiano Ronaldo. They can be the key to retailers winning or losing. This realization has created a new urgency for brands and retailers to adopt digitized solutions across their networks. It's also sent a rush of VC funding into supply chain and logistics technologies. VC funding to these companies hit a record high in 2021, and CB Insight's latest data shows that funding to this space remained elevated in Q1, despite a cooldown in the broader venture capital market. Now, this list of companies behind me is just a couple of examples of the types of companies that are helping retailers solve their supply chain challenges. Obviously, a lot going on here, so I won't run through the whole list, but as you can see, they're helping with everything from upstream to downstream challenges, including product development and demand forecasting, all the way to fulfillment and the last mile. But regardless of whether it's helping companies adopt new technologies or capabilities, brands today are working toward developing what they call a resilient supply chain, one that's defined by speed, agility, and visibility. So first, we'll talk about speed. Now, of course, there are a ton of opportunities to increase speed throughout the supply chain, but for today's conversation, we're going to focus on the last mile delivery space, and in particular, rapid delivery. In addition to some of the established players out there like Uber and Delivery Hero, the last mile has been a white-hot area for VC funding. Going back to some CB Insights data, global funding to the on-demand delivery space doubled last year to $19 billion. This list behind me shows some of the biggest recipients from last year, and it's also worth noting that both Swiggy and Getir have gone on to raise additional mega rounds in Q1. Now, I know probably a lot of you are thinking this space potentially has gotten a little bit too hot. We've recently seen a wave of consolidation regulations, layoffs, and government pushback against these types of businesses, but it is hard to argue with the fact that they are having a very large impact on the industry. And it makes sense, right? As consumers' expectations for fast delivery increase, brands and retailers are going to have to ink partnerships and invest in their own solutions in order to compete. But if they're, basically these are just a couple of the areas that they're going to be inking partnerships, and they shouldn't get so focused on this space in an effort simply to keep costs down. Because at the end of the day, these solutions do not solve some of the issues that have been at the heart of recent supply chain disruptions. Of course, things like port congestion, factory closures, and rising fuel costs from the Russia-Ukraine war. So again, while it's an exciting space and one that companies do need to be looking at, they shouldn't be so focused on this space that they overlook some of the opportunities to solve some of their more deeply embedded supply chain challenges. It's a good segue into agility because we are also seeing a number of brands and retailers taking their supply chains into their own hands in order to overcome these and some other deeply embedded supply chain challenges. Over in the US, we have seen companies like American Eagle acquire startups to solve for this. They recently acquired Quiet Logistics, which operates a network of in-market fulfillment centers. Companies are securing their own capacity by chartering their own cargo ships to bypass port congestion or securing their own planes and trains. Germany's Lidl's actually taken this one step farther by saying that they're actually going to be setting up their own shipping operation. They're forging new partnerships. We heard from Morrison's that they signed a deal with quick commerce company GoPuff. And this deal was particularly notable because it was the first time that GoPuff is going to be selling another retailer's products on its platform. At the same time, of course, Morrison's is getting into this quickly evolving space. They're also moving or diversifying production. We've heard from IKEA that they're going to be moving some of their manufacturing from Asia to Turkey. And Henkel's talked about the importance of manufacturing the same product in multiple locations. The idea there being that if one factory goes down, they are not stuck at a complete standstill. The last area I want to talk about today is visibility. Now, retailers and brands are increasingly leveraging IoT technologies from companies like Everything so that they can have real-time visibility into where their products are. It's still pretty early stages, but we are also seeing increased adoption of the use of blockchain technology in the supply chain as companies like H&M and Walmart are adopting a shared ledger to more accurately trace products and ensure ethical and sustainable manufacturing. Meanwhile, advances in machine learning and computing power are also spurring interest in digital twins, which are already in use by some advanced companies like Ocado. Visibility is the bucket that we think is most ripe for innovation here at Shoptalk. Not only can these technology advances help brands and retailers create efficiencies across the entire supply chain, but they can also provide consumers much-wanted insights into where their products are sourced and produced. So to wrap this section for today, here are a couple of key takeaways. First up, the role of the supply chain has changed. It's no longer important just when the game is on the line, but can actually make organizations proactively better. The definition of agility has also changed. While it used to be about being as lean as possible and then buying and leaning into trends, it's now about intentionally building redundancies. And finally, in order to make the supply chain a strategic differentiator, companies should be thinking about elevating the chief supply chain officer onto the executive leadership team. We're starting to see this happen more often at some companies, including Macy's and American Eagle. And it's an important trend, not just because it will help organizations identify opportunities to increase efficiencies across the entire supply chain, but it will also allow them to move more in lockstep with other divisions in the company.
Yeah, supply chains have definitely gone from an area that you only notice when it's broken to one that's critical for business success. And another area of retail where innovation seemed slow and is now happening all at once is around checkout and payments. And that's the second category that we'd like to examine this morning. Payments hasn't always been that exciting, right? It's fair to say, too, that payments technology hasn't always innovated at the same rate of speed as, say, marketing technology or fulfillment technology. But the past several years have seen a remarkable shift driven by two key imperatives: the need to be frictionless and the desire to offer shoppers more flexibility. It's kind of like a 60s dance craze, right? Where the kids simultaneously wanted to move fast and keep up with the beat while bending and stretching to emulate all the latest moves. So 60s is having a moment driven by these two things. Let's explore some specific payments technologies innovations. First, of course, we have to talk about buy now, pay later. which continues to grow at a rapid clip, particularly here in Europe. It's interesting to note that BNPL already accounts for about 8% of European e-commerce transactions by value, and that's driven by especially fast adoption in Sweden and Germany. BNPL has exploded because it's fast, it's easy, and it seems friendly to the consumer. Of course, the flip side of that is in recent months, we've seen growing media and regulatory scrutiny about the downsides of BNPL, as sometimes it drives consumers to make purchases they can't otherwise afford. But nonetheless, retailers are very interested in BNPL because it maybe prompts people to buy things they might not otherwise. And we expect that we will continue to see really interesting moves here. Just yesterday or the day before, Apple announced Apple Pay later, which I think signifies that some very significant technology players are beginning to jump into this market. But in addition to buy now, pay later, we're also seeing things like crypto payments, mobile wallets, also kind of shaking up the market, vying with established payment options like credit cards, debit cards, instant pay, those sorts of things, and attracting increasing attention from consumers, retailers, and regulators alike as we move forward. Innovation in payments technologies can also be examined in terms of investment in payments technology startups. Again, I'm dipping into CB Insights data. CB Insights has found that in 2021, payments technology startups attracted a record $33 billion in funding. Again, like in many markets in the last few weeks, we've started to see a correction here, but nonetheless, we think payments is going to stay interesting for some time to come as retailers and consumers alike kind of explore new options, try new things to buy the items that they want to buy. This is the obligatory many vendor logo slide. People love taking pictures of these slides. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about any specific technologies here, except to make the point that these two imperatives, that you want to be frictionless and you want to be flexible, we're seeing them apply across the board, across not only e-commerce, but brick and mortar as well, right? On the frictionless side, you have companies that are aiming to enable one-click checkout on any e-commerce service. In the real brick and mortar world, you're seeing companies ranging from scan and go solutions to just walk out type technologies, all aiming to make that last step in a transaction as fast as possible. On the flexibility side, you see crypto and BNPL and wallets all being accepted, again, both in e-commerce and in the physical world. And I want to draw a special attention to the bottom left box. I think these companies like Adyen and Primer that are enabling kind of a more modular approach to a payments tech stack are going to be really important in enabling companies to be more flexible with the payment options they offer to their customers. But this growing array of payments options, right, it runs a risk for retailers. And the risk is, I've heard it in the States, it's called the NASCARification of retail, but we figured kind of on this side of the Atlantic, it's more the Formula One-ification of retail. The idea here is that the risk is you're trying to make payments both frictionless and flexible, but sometimes adding more flexibility adds friction. If consumers need to navigate a whole host of different logos, different payment options, in that checkout process, you're at a huge risk of losing them. Like racing cars plastered with sponsor brands. Again, the more logos that you add, the more options that you add to a consumer, the less flexible things become. And this is important because, again, consumers say that complicated checkout drives them to abandon their shopping carts. Fully 24% of consumers say they've abandoned an e-commerce transaction because the site wanted them to register or create an account. 17% say that they've abandoned a transaction because it just took too many steps to get from putting something in their cart to checking out with it. So really important, how are retailers addressing this kind of ideal balance between frictionless and flexible? Well, some are taking the option that Fanatics has on the left here, where they're offering kind of a wide variety of different options, kind of as little logos, but foregrounding a few key solutions that they think their customers are going to be most interested in. Walmart on the right is taking a kind of AI approach almost, where they're kind of letting their e-commerce platform suggest an ideal payment based on who you are, what you've bought before, how you've paid before, and what you're buying now. So either way, you can offer choice, you can offer simplicity, but it's hard to do both at the same time. A few key takeaways around payments, right? Again, I think it's really important to find that balance between frictionless and flexible. That's going to differ depending on what kinds of goods you offer and what the demographics of your customer base are. Two, we think it's important for retailers to surface payments options much earlier in the purchase process while somebody's still shopping for something. If somebody knows the ways that they'll be able to pay for it, you may be able to encourage somebody to make a purchase when they might otherwise have walked away. And then third, if payments is really important in brick and mortar and today's e-commerce world, it is going to make or break your success as the metaverse becomes a more important place where people shop. Payments in the metaverse needs to be not only frictionless and flexible, but also fun as well. But for the retailers and brands that can unlock that, they have the key to metaverse shopping success.
Well, that is a fantastic segue, Joe, because the
I,
third
I try.
category that we're going to be talking about today is new platforms, and in particular, the rise of the metaverse. Now, according to Coresight Research, the metaverse represents a $50 billion opportunity for retail alone by 2025. Although NFTs generate the lion's share of the headlines related to the metaverse, it presents numerous opportunities for companies across the spectrum of marketing and commerce. Now, on the marketing side of the spectrum are things like in-game ads and limited time live experiences, often tied to giveaways or promotions. An example of this is Miller Coors. They decided that this year, rather than running a traditional Super Bowl ad, they were going to open a virtual bar in Decentraland where consumers could come in and play virtual darts or billiards. Now, by visiting the virtual bar and engaging with the brand, people also had the opportunity to win $500 in cash to put toward nothing other than delicious Miller Lite. Somewhere in the middle of the spectrum are NFTs, virtual products that are produced and sold by creators, and in-game loyalty rewards that consumers can unlock, again, by engaging with brands in the metaverse. And then on the commerce side of the spectrum are direct-to-avatar products, virtual storefronts, and the sale of physical goods within the metaverse. We've already been joking amongst ourselves about the new acronym that's sure to surface if this does take off. As retailers' omni-channel strategies evolve, it's eventually going to come from buy online, pick up in store to buy on metaverse, pick up in store. So please don't use that acronym.
Pompous.
It's not meant to be taken seriously, but if you see it out there, then you can give us credit for it. But although the metaverse presents a number of opportunities for brands and retailers looking to engage with today's consumers, gone are the days when issuing a splashy press release is enough. Today, companies are really expected to take a strategic approach and have a well thought out strategy. Now, to that point, there are a couple of key considerations that brands and retailers have to have in mind when they are developing their metaverse strategy. The first of those is which platform or platforms are going to host their experience. Now, this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list, but it does show some popular options like gaming platforms, including Fortnite and Roblox, decentralized worlds like Sandbox or Decentraland, and social platforms like Zepeto. The second key question companies need to be asking themselves is who's going to be owning the metaverse strategy? Now, if you think back to that framework that I showed you earlier about how things really can sort of run the spectrum of whether it should live under marketing, digital, or e-commerce, I think really a company's goals can determine which part of the organization the strategy lives in. We've also seen in some cases this really starting from the top and going down. In some cases, the CEO really is the person who's driving the strategy here. And some companies, Caring is one example of this, have actually brought on digital talent. They actually recently appointed someone from Google to help them with their digital capability roadmap, and included on that is their metaverse strategy. At the end of the day, though, there really does need to be one single person owning the strategy. You know, when you look at this framework here, it just kind of conjures up memories of some of the silos that companies have been living in currently in the retail industry. And so really, these things cannot live together in isolation. These parts of the organization need to work together in tandem in order for a company to have a cohesive metaverse strategy. Now, companies are becoming wise to that, so they are bringing on talent whose specific goal is to oversee the metaverse strategy. We've seen this from companies like Disney and Crate and Barrel, bringing on folks whose sole purpose is to oversee the metaverse strategy. It's also caused some to speculate whether the chief metaverse officer could be the next C-level executive added to the executive leadership board. Now, the last question that brands and retailers need to solve for is whether they're going to build their own metaverse talent, whether they are going to acquire it like we saw Nike do with Artifact, or if they're going to partner with digital agencies or other partners in order to bring this to life. Now, in reality, this is probably a very large oversimplification because there is going to be a combined strategy of all three of these, probably from most organizations out there who enter the metaverse. Now, it goes without saying, of course, there are still a lot of challenges to the metaverse becoming mainstream. Everything from the viability of a truly decentralized world to the mass adoption of cryptocurrency. But at the end of the day, early versions of the metaverse show consumer acceptance of several big metaversial pillars. We continue to make up words, but metaversial pillars is another one for you to take home. But those pillars include augmented reality and virtual experiences, which essentially tells us that even if the idealistic version of the metaverse does not take off, it is not something that can be ignored.
We do see retailers who are adverse to the metaverse, and mostly we think this comes out of a lack of understanding.
Because people are like, well, I don't really see the metaverse is going to be anything. It's like, well, 10 years ago, would you have thought that kids were going to communicate only through Snapchat, which are disappearing images and texts and emojis? And probably not.
We think the only downside to this space is not taking it seriously. The only risk today in the metaverse is dismissing it and not appreciating the true potential this has to change the way you serve your customers and engage them.
You know, this is just a massive shift in social engagement and how we socially interact with other human beings. The metaverse is truly the next, version of human social interaction. And that's what makes it so exciting.
That was a clip from Shoptalk's mini documentary on understanding retail's metaverse opportunity. It's a full 10-minute video where we interviewed industry experts and folks who are actually launching metaverse experiences. So I highly recommend you use the QR code here, get the full version of the video. It'll be accessible on our YouTube channel. And if you don't have a chance to scan this today, do not worry. We will be sharing this deck with everyone after the show, so you will be able to scan it then. In the meantime, though, a couple of key takeaways for today. First up, while the idealistic version of a decentralized, fully immersive metaverse is believed to be about a decade away, early versions of the metaverse have already arrived. Second, even though there's a ton of excitement about the metaverse and what it can mean for brands and retailers, its creation and adoption still face many challenges. And again, in order to succeed, brands and retailers need to take a strategic approach to how they can show up authentically and meaningfully. And finally, even though you may challenge the notion that the metaverse will ever take off, the most dangerous thing that you can do is ignore it. Because even if it doesn't end up becoming a reality, many of its enabling technologies and consumer experiences are sure to manifest themselves in other ways.
Yep. The final category on our board today relates to the consumer. There are so many ways that consumers' behaviors, preferences, wants, needs are changing, but the one we wanted to zero in on this morning has to do with consumers' relationship to time. We've talked about the value of time, attention, engagement for ages now, right? We all kind of say time is money, but the last several years have prompted a major rethink on consumers' part about their time, how they spend it, all around the world. That in turn is reshaping their relationships with retailers and brands, forcing retailers and brands to think about their consumers' time in new ways. To cite just three immediate examples, right? Europe is facing a historically tight labor market. While you're not seeing the sort of great resignation, people up and quitting their jobs here like you're seeing in the United States, certainly surveys in Europe suggest that a lot of people are rethinking their job or career choices. That's fundamentally to do with how consumers value their time, the time that they spend at their work, and how they're compensated for it. The rise of fast commerce, quick commerce like GoPuff and Getir, as Krystina said, it's creating supply chain challenges in the last mile, but it too relates in some ways to consumers' relationship to their time, right? How long should I have to wait between placing an order and getting something that I've ordered? And then third, I'm coming back to the metaverse one more time, right? As consumers begin shifting their time towards the metaverse, that too is going to be a major reshift in consumer media time and therefore time opportunities for retailers and brands as well. Consumers on Roblox already spend 2.6 hours per day there. So even if the metaverse doesn't quite enjoy that hockey stick growth that some proponents say it will, as it does grow, again, you're going to need to be rethinking where you're delivering your messages, how you're delivering your messages to consumers as well. Now, you can't talk about time without talking about attention. Even before the pandemic, a lot of people were talking about how consumers today have the 8-second attention span of a goldfish. That's fortunately not true, but what is true is that consumers' perceptions of their attention are changing. A survey here in the UK found that almost half of consumers said that they felt like their attention spans were shorter now than they were a couple of years ago. 65% of consumers in the UK said that young people's attention spans were shorter now than they were a couple of years ago. So what's going on here? Actually, our attention spans are mostly okay, right? We can still sit down and concentrate, focus on something when we really need to, but the demands on our time and attention have changed tremendously. Think of it as like an ever-spinning wheel of different options in terms of media, in terms of topics that we're stressed about, in terms of things that are going on in our lives. It's dazzling, it's worrying sometimes, but it's definitely distracting. Given that we have all of these different unexpected media, time pressures, things to worry about, it's kind of natural that not all of us can manage that in any sort of organized way. And so again, attention is not shortening, but distractions are increasing. What do retailers and brands do about that? Well, I think it's really about showing that you respect consumers' time. One example of a retailer doing this is IKEA. IKEA in Poland has introduced what they're calling a home of the future store concept. It's very beautiful, but very different from the maze-like IKEA experience that we all kind of know and love. Another example of a retailer that took an early lead on rethinking consumers' time is Target in the United States. Target, back in 2017, started redesigning its stores with two distinct entrances. One it called the inspiration entrance for people who wanted to walk in and browse around and kind of see everything they had. One they called the ease entrance, where people just wanted to go in, see a quick selection of rapidly or frequently purchased items, and get out again. They're also using the ease entrance for buy online, pick up in store as well. So inspiration and ease, these two different kinds of shopping behaviors, don't just manifest in store, they also manifest online as well. And I think smart e-commerce retailers respond to that too. We heard from List on the main stage yesterday. I think they're a great example, right? Inspiration, if you kind of don't know what you want to buy, they have many curated lists of goods that kind of suit any conceivable apparel shopping need. Ease, if you know what you want, they have all of the best-in-breed user experience tweaks to kind of filter, search, find exactly what you want, and get out as fast as possible. Instagram checkout is another great example of a retail experience that really respects consumers' time, maximizes the value of time. You can buy something on Instagram checkout before you've even realized that you've purchased it, leading to some surprising deliveries a few days later. I love that there is now online impulse purchase, though. I think it's very inspirational. At the same time, you can look at something like live stream shopping as the opposite, right? Somebody who wants inspiration wants to engage with an expert in a more personal way, be inspired before they make their purchase. So again, wrapping this section with 3 key takeaways. Consumer attention, it's not shorter, but it is finite and divided in more places than ever before. So retailers need to really respect that attention. You need to be thinking about both online and offline shopping experiences in terms of both ease for somebody who wants to be in and out fast, and inspiration for somebody who wants to take their time. And finally, we see time as a new personalization factor around e-commerce, right? We've spent many years, much time and much money personalizing based on somebody's demographics, somebody's psychographics, who they are. But we need to start personalizing e-commerce based on how much time somebody has too, to really kind of tailor that experience based on people who want the quick in and out or people who want to take their time and be inspired.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So to conclude for today, the game of retail is changing quickly. And in order to compete, retailers and brands need to be focused on the supply chain, payments, new platforms, and the consumer. It can feel like there are obstacles everywhere, like the little whammy cartoon who shows up at the absolute worst time when you're playing Press Your Luck. But it's important to remember that if the game of retail wasn't so challenging, it wouldn't be so fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.